Imagine waking up tomorrow and being completely convinced that you're already dead. In 1880, a woman walked into the doctor's office and made one of the most terrifying claims in mental health history. She claimed she had no brain, no stomach, no intestines, no nerves. In fact, she believed that most of her body no longer existed. But that wasn't the disturbing part, because she also believed that she was already dead, and since dead people don't need to eat food, she stopped eating, and eventually she starved herself to death. Her doctor, Jules Cotard, had never seen anything like it before, neither had anyone else. More than a century later, doctors still encounter patients who become completely convinced they've died, lost their organs, or ceased to exist entirely. This condition became known as Cotard Syndrome, and it forces us to confront a terrifying question. How does a perfectly functioning brain convince itself that it's dead? Because the answer reveals something disturbing about every single one of us. When most people hear the story, they assume it's simple. The woman was psychotic, case closed. But that explanation falls apart almost immediately, because most people with Cotard syndrome aren't completely detached from reality. They can recognize faces, hold conversations, and solve problems. Some people can even explain why they believe that they've died, which creates a bizarre contradiction. Their logic often works, their conclusion doesn't. And that raises a much bigger question. What if Cotard syndrome isn't really about death? What if it's about reality itself? To understand that, we need to go back to Mademoiselle X, the patient that started this all. The patient became known as Mademoiselle X, and what made her case so disturbing wasn't just what she believed, it was how certain that she was. She claimed she had no brain, no nerves, chest, stomach, or intestines. Most people hear this and they assume she was hallucinating, but that's not what was happening. She wasn't seeing monsters or hearing voices. She was reaching a conclusion. A horrifying conclusion that somehow, despite still waking up and talking, she no longer existed. Doctors argued with her, reality argued with her, her own body argued with her. Nothing worked. Because once the brain accepts a false reality, every piece of evidence gets filtered through it. And eventually, Mademoiselle X stopped eating. And why eat if you're already dead? Why survive if you no longer exist? Eventually, she did die from starvation. And for decades, doctors had no idea how to explain what happened. But then more cases began appearing, and each one seemed impossible. One man became convinced that he had already died and gone to hell. Another believed all of his internal organs had disappeared. Others claimed their blood vessels had vanished, and some became convinced their bodies were rotting from the inside out. At first, psychiatrists thought these were isolated cases, rare curiosities. Then they noticed something strange. The same pattern kept appearing. Different people, different countries, different lives. Yet somehow they all arrived at the same terrifying conclusion: I'm dead. Which raises another obvious question. How can multiple human brains make the exact same impossible mistake? To answer that, we need to understand something that most people never think about. You don't experience reality directly. Your brain creates it. Right now, your brain is performing millions of calculations every second. It's processing light, sound, memory, emotion, meaning, and somehow all of this gets combined into a single experience. That feeling of being alive, the feeling of being you. But here's the disturbing part. Scientists believe that Cotard syndrome may happen when that feeling breaks. Not reality, the feeling of reality. Imagine looking at your own reflection, you recognize the face, you know it's yours, but emotionally, it feels empty, wrong, disconnected. Now imagine that sensation spreading everywhere. Your family doesn't feel real, your body doesn't feel real, your emotions don't feel real, you don't feel real. What conclusion would your brain eventually reach? Some researchers believe the brain tries to explain that disconnect, and one explanation is horrifyingly simple. If nothing feels alive, then maybe I'm dead. Suddenly, the delusion begins to make sense, not because it's true, but because the brain is desperately trying to explain an impossible experience. And that's when scientists discovered something even stranger. Cotard syndrome has a bizarre cousin. It's called Cotard Syndrome, and it may reveal a clue that may explain everything. People with Cotard syndrome recognize their loved ones, but emotionally, they think something is missing. Their mother looks like their mother, sounds like their mother, acts like their mother, yet the emotional feeling of familiarity is gone, so the brain creates an explanation. This can't be my mother. She must be an imposter. Think about how strange that is. One disorder convinces you other people aren't real, the other convinces you that you aren't real. Different conclusions, possibly the same underlying problem. And that realization changed how scientists view Cotard Syndrome forever, because maybe these patients weren't disconnected from reality, maybe reality itself no longer felt real. Then researchers reviewed dozens of Cotard Syndrome cases, and what they found surprised them. Most patients weren't experiencing the condition on its own, the overwhelming majority were also suffering from severe depression. Many experienced extreme anxiety, some were dealing with psychosis, others had neurological damage. Suddenly, Cotard Syndrome stopped looking like a standalone disorder. Instead, it looked more like the final stage of something much darker. Imagine feeling hopeless for months, then years. Imagine losing all emotional connection to the world around you. Imagine waking up every day feeling less alive than the day before. How long before your brain starts asking a terrifying question? What if I'm already gone? And for some people, that's exactly what happens. Some of the most disturbing cases appeared after strokes, brain injuries, neurological illnesses. In some patients, physical damage to the brain seemed capable of triggering the syndrome. That discovery changed everything. Because now the question wasn't, why would someone believe they're dead? The question became, what part of the brain makes us feel alive in the first place? And nobody had a complete answer. Even today, scientists can't identify patterns. They can identify risk factors, but the exact mechanism remains a mystery. Which means one of the strangest experiences a human can have is still not fully understood. And that's unsettling, because it reveals how fragile consciousness really is. Most of us assume reality is solid, permanent, reliable, but conditions like Cotard Syndrome suggest something else. The feeling that you exist may be far more delicate than we realize. But despite how terrifying this condition is, there is hope. Many patients recover, some respond to medication, others improve when the underlying depression is treated, and some recover so completely that they eventually look back on their delusion with disbelief. Imagine that. One day you're convinced you're dead, months later you're sitting in a room wondering how you ever believed it. The same brain that created the delusion can also escape it. And maybe that's the most fascinating part of this entire story. Not that a brain can convince itself it's dead, but that the brain can convince itself of anything. Every sight, every sound, memory, emotion, certainty exists inside 3 pounds of tissue locked inside your skull. And when that system changes, reality changes with it. Cotard Syndrome isn't terrifying because it's rare, it's terrifying because it reveals something about all of us. That feeling that you're alive isn't automatic, your brain creates it, every second. And for a handful of people throughout history, that feeling disappeared, leaving behind one final, impossible conclusion. I'm already dead.